Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Hi everyone, welcome to Alex on Story. My name is Alex. This video is all about animation workflow, specifically pose-to-pose. There are three main workflows in computer animation: pose-to-pose, straight ahead, and layered. This is the first video in a three-part series, with each video looking at one of the workflows. First, let's talk about what is workflow and why it is so important to your success. Workflow is the way in which you do a task, the steps taken. If you do not have a workflow, you're lost. You're guessing. Workflow provides structure. The better your workflow, paired with your skill, the higher quality you can produce. Workflow is such a broad and vast topic that it is hardly talked about. I've come to the understanding that workflow has layers. You start broad at the top and work your way down to greater detail. At each layer, you have a unique workflow. With each workflow, you should always be pointed towards quality, meaning your workflow should always have a desired outcome. If it doesn't, you're pointed in different directions and will miss out on quality. A simple workflow for me always starts at the top with the question, how do I want the audience to feel? Happy, sad, excited. Once I have my answer, I know what I'm aiming at. So if I'm setting up a scene, my staging, framing, and composition are focused on achieving the desired feeling. If I'm blocking my character, the posing is created to support that desired feeling. Let's move on and talk about pose-to-pose. Pose-to-pose is a method used to block out your scene. Specific to character animation, it is the posing of a character from one idea to another, with each new idea represented with a new pose. The true strength of this method is its communicative power. The better you are posing, the better your quality. The concept of pose-to-pose was created in the early 1900s at Disney. It was cemented as one of the 12 principles of animation by the 9 Old Men in the early 1930s. Pose-to-pose is over 100 years old and has withstood the test of time and the changing of mediums. The one side effect of pose-to-pose is the end result can turn out stiff, meaning your animation can lose that spark of life. I'll provide solutions to this problem as we build the scene together. Now, before we jump to Blender and the demonstration, I want to tell you about this video and this channel's first sponsor, Skillshare. I can't think of a better company to partner with than Skillshare. They are driven to providing the best learning experience. Do you want to learn to model, improve your lighting and rendering, learn to script, or learn a new skill using a new application? Let Skillshare help. I've used Skillshare in the past to learn and improve my design and coding skills, and have seen my work and understanding improve. Next, I will be diving into social media storytelling, making videos that connect. Really excited and looking to apply what I'm learning from Lily in my upcoming videos. I want you to remember this: self-improvement is incremental. You must take the first step. Each step leads you to your goal. Let Skillshare help you along your journey. The first 1,000 people to use my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Here we are inside Blender. I'm using the sprite character from the Blender movie Sprite Fright. You can see the pose-to-pose workflow here, the progression at least. On the right, we have the final product, and on the left, you can see the 5 poses that were created to build the performance. I'm going to go over the pose-to-pose workflow a little more in detail, and then we'll do the steps together. So the first thing we do is come up with the idea. The best way to do that is to listen to the audio. By listening to the audio, you're going to come up with acting choices. You may or may not have storyboards to follow. If you do, a lot of the information is going to come from those boards. After you've come up with your ideas, you enter the blocking stage. And the blocking stage is the most important part of any of your workflow. It's the area you make the biggest decisions. So you want to be most broad and not commit to any one idea until you know it's working. So the blocking stage is the area you're making the biggest decisions. And the decisions you make in that blocking stage is going to be felt all the way down to your final finished animation. So the blocking stage is, to me, the most important aspect. In the blocking stage, you want to hit your key poses. Your key poses are the poses your character stays in the longest. Because your character is in that particular pose for a longer period of time, it's an important piece of information. So that's why it's considered a key pose. Those key poses are your storytelling poses. Some poses are more important than others. You know which one's important, like I said, by what pose stays on screen the longest. You want to come up with pose ideas and not commit to them quite yet. What's important is that you know what poses are important by how long they're on screen, but equally important is knowing that this pose relates to this pose, relates to this pose, and this pose. Because one pose says something, but we're working with all the poses that say something broader about the shot in general. So you need to spend time on all the poses so that you know they relate to each other. When I was first starting out, I would spend so much time, hours, on one pose, only to find out that that pose that I spent a long time on no longer relates to the whole scene, to the other, let's say, handful of poses, and I would have to redo the pose I've spent a long time on. Instead of being rough at the beginning, seeing that the whole shot is playing, and then committing to the quality once you know the idea is playing. I think that's a better approach. In the blocking stage, you're starting to play with timing. To me, timing and posing are the two most important principles of animation. The combination of these two principles have the biggest impact on your performance. We can start to add appeal in our poses, even when they're rough, by how they're relating to each other. So, the shape and size of the pose in relation to the other poses around them, it makes a big difference. It's maybe small, small, big, small, medium, small, small, big. You want to vary up the shape and size of your poses so that the viewer is entertained. So keep that in mind as you're blocking. Depending what studio you're working for, or if you just want fresh eyes on your work, the blocking stage is a great time to share with others because you haven't committed that much time. So changing your ideas at this stage is the best time to do it. Next, we move on to the second pass. You know the idea is working now because you can see it visually. Your poses are working, they're communicating together, the timing is working, you're happy with the blocking. Your second pass really is a cleanup of all your poses. Now you're going to spend time adding the detail, strengthening the pose, the silhouette, clarity of that pose, the communicative power. That's really what the second pass to me is just strengthening what your blocking is and making everything more clear, maybe tightening the timing. Now we move on to the third pass. The third pass really is about adding breakdown keys and settles. So we have our key poses, they look good, and the breakdown keys are the keys that are between the two key poses. An idea and an idea, and what's happening between those ideas is your breakdown key. Typically, the breakdown key does two things. One, it helps to identify the arc, because when you're going from one pose to another, it's a straight line. So the breakdown key happens somewhere in the middle, and all it really does is define the arc, how we get into that next pose. The second thing the breakdown key does is affect the timing of that body part. If I move, let's say, the center of gravity, that main control, the COG, if I move it in space, not only am I affecting the arc, the path that it's taken, but also the timing. So I'll demonstrate that as well. So keep that in mind. The breakdown key, the biggest thing you're influencing is the arc. Secondary is the timing. Then we go into the settle. Typically, when we do a pose-to-pose workflow, we go from one idea to another, one pose to another, and then we have a hold. That hold is important because it gives the audience time to register your idea, but it also allows time so when we add the settle, we get into that movement. So it's not just a hold, flat, no movement, but it's a moving hold. That's important. So that's what the settle is basically a little bit of life so the character isn't stiff. That's the settle. Depending on the quality required and the animation style, the third pass will also start to blend between those ideas. So we have the post-pose, we have the breakdown, and the settle. That's really the formula. Post-pose, breakdown, settle. And that's just a repeat. Post-pose, breakdown, settle. Now, we talked about the settle. It helps to not make things so stiff. But another way to then add another layer on top of that is blending between those. So I'll demonstrate that, and that becomes a little bit more of an advanced part of the workflow. So if you get to the pose, breakdown, settle, I think that's a fantastic place to get to. Then blending between all those things is that extra quality. And at that point, things do start to get a little more complicated and the curves do become a little messier. So be aware of that. After that, we enter the cleanup phase where we add detail and clean up any areas that stand out. Let's set up the scene together now and start blocking. We're going to start with a new scene. What I like to do when you've downloaded your character is drag and drop that downloaded file into your Blender scene. So just drag and drop and open. The benefit of doing this is that all the scripts are loaded when you do it this way, so it makes it easier. In this case as well, there's a whole bunch of poses that come with the file. Let's come on over here to the animation tab. And our character is tiny, so I'm just going to select period numpad, and we see him over here. What I like to do is have the right panel be my camera window, and that's where I like to view everything and keep it as clean as possible. And then in the left window, that's where I like to do my work. So I'm just going to switch things around. Let's actually go Control Tab and let's create that camera. Shift A, and we're going to come on over here, camera and camera. Perfect. And let's also do a ground plane. Shift A, mesh, plane, and we'll scale that down a little bit. Perfect. If we hit 0 on our numpad, we go into the camera, and I'm just going to frame in a little bit. Let's come on over here to our output properties. And this particular file seems to have the aspect ratio wrong, so just be mindful of that. Another option I like to do with the camera is this area outside the frame. I like to darken that. So we need to select our camera. You can just come on over here, select the camera, and let's go over to the camera properties. And under viewport display, this passport out, I like to go 0.99. It darkens everything, allows me to focus on my view, on my frame, but also if I have elements of the set that go beyond the frame, I can see parts of those lines, and it helps me inform if I want to see a little more or a little less of the set. What we also want to do is frame within the camera window. So let's go N and go to View, and this Camera to View is such a great button. You just click it, hit N again, and now I can frame freely from the camera. Very powerful. You can select the rig or the character or any part of the character and start framing. So we're just going to keep this very rough. Basically, we'll recreate what I've already done in the animation. Something like this. Once you have your framing, you can hit N and just click this camera to view again. And now if I accidentally bump the camera, I don't ruin the framing, and you can hit 0 on your numpad, always come back into that camera view. Okay, so we want to clean this up. You just click these two buttons right there, gets rid of everything, and it allows you to look at your poses and your performance. So I love that. Let's come on over here, and now we need those controls back. I just click these two buttons. It just shows me everything. And you saw there I had to update my camera for the controls to show. So that's the first time I've seen that. But you have some other options in here, and what we're actually going to do is turn on this text info. Click that. What's important about that is when you play your animation, you can see the frames per second. Next, what I like to do is go Control Tab in the dope sheet and just bring up a graph editor. Hit N, I don't need that extra info. And we want to bring up our timeline as well. And then this extra bit of window, I don't use it, so I just pull that down, increase your screen real estate. The last thing we need to get going is the audio. Here's how I like to set up the scene with the audio. And if there is a way to bring the audio like there is in Maya, to display the wavelength information right in the timeline, I think that would be easier. But here's how I like to do it. I like to come on over here, right click, let's do a horizontal split, and just bring this down somewhere in here. Then I can change this to the video sequencer, and I'm going to add my audio in here. You can see that I'm going in and out of windows pretty quickly. I like to do that, and that's a hotkey that I just did, and I demonstrate that in my intro to animation. So let's bring in our audio. After you download that audio, you just drag and drop it, and you can see it's right there. Perfect. So I like to bring it to channel 1, and you can see when you're scrubbing it, you get these values on the two corners, on the left and the right, and I just drag it right until I get to frame 1. And another thing, it tells you how long the audio is, 47 frames. One other thing I want to do is hit N and go display waveform. Awesome. So it's down there. I'm also going to drag this over, and now what I'm going to do is just frame within this window, in the way here a little bit, but just drag this and make this waveform as big as I can. That's all I'm interested in here. There it is. So that's what we're doing, or that's what I'm doing, and then you can see the scrubbing. And so what we want to do now is, as we're scrubbing, it's also valuable to hear the audio as you're scrubbing. Last thing we want to do for the audio is hear the audio while we're scrubbing. So coming over here to playback and go scrubbing. So that's great. So let's make the end of this shot 47 frames. And now we have our scene ready to start blocking. We have our length, we have the audio, we have the character, and everything is set just the way I like it. Let's go into pose mode. Select part of the rig, hit Control Tab, and that takes you into pose mode. I'm going to select everything, and I see some keys here. I'm not sure what they are, but I'm just going to select everything. Select everything by hitting A in your timeline, and X and delete keys. I don't know what those are, don't need them. So even before starting to think about the poses and my performance, my acting, I like to put the character in a neutral pose instead of this T pose. Right now the rig is in IK mode for the hands, and I typically work in FK for the hands. Let's go N, and under the cloud rig, we're going to come to layers. And one important thing for riggers out there, if any riggers are listening, is I think in the visibility of the rig, you can add more functionality, more options. Right now there's only an on and off for IK and FK, but it'd be great to have an on and off IK for hands and feet. Having more options, I think is valuable. So I need my FK and I need my IK. So those are going to be turned on. The face, the only thing I need for the face in the blocking is I do like to block the eye line as well here. And that's attached to the face. So that's why I keep the face rig options on, even though I don't need any face controls at this point. I do need the fingers, so that's great. And that's the only options I need when I'm blocking the scene. Let's come on over to settings, and under FK-IK switch, that's where we can decide what's what. So for the hands, I like to be in FK, and we can test it right now. It's this red control, and you can see it does nothing. And I can leave it with some value on it, and then just scrub, and you can see the hand moving to the FK control. So I'm going to do both the left and the right. Now my rig is set up the way I like to work. So know that those options are here with this character under the cloud rig. I'm going to hit A, just Alt-R resets the rotation, Alt-G resets the translation back to 0. So let's set up the pose just so we're not in a T pose. That T pose is typically what a rig comes in. And then we'll start our posing together. Right here in the top corner you have this X mirror on, and I like using that only at the beginning. So let's select the upper arm here and just rotate it down. We're going to grab that shoulder control and down a little bit also. And all I'm doing is trying to build a bit of a neutral pose and then start thinking about the performance. With the fingers as well, we'll do a simple little neutral hand pose. One thing as well is you can see how dense the controls are here. Here's one of the options you can also turn on for this. So here's the character rig, and you can come in over here to this data properties, and under viewport display, you can turn off in front. And I like to do that. So now what I like to do is if I do need to see through my model, I can always do Alt-Z, and I still get the same option, but when I don't want to see it, Alt-Z just hides that. So let's select the fingers on one side, just like this. Group select, and then by hitting Control you can minus selection. So just those 6 fingers in this case, and let's curl them up. You can also see that I am also using my translate and rotate tool, maybe a little differently than some others. And how I like to do it is by hitting spacebar, and you can see you get this option here, GRS. So what I do is spacebar G, spacebar R, spacebar S. And it's just a quick motion, and I like using the GUI to actually rotate and translate. So we're just going to curl the fingers a little bit, giving them a little bit more of a natural pose. Cool, so here's my default menu pose. So let's turn off the X mirror, and now let's start to think about the first pose we want to do. Your first pose usually is the strongest pose in your performance. So as you're thinking of ideas, and you can stand up and act your performance out, and you just start hitting some ideas, some poses, and the pose that you're in the longest, typically you'll start there. That might be at the beginning of the shot, middle of the shot, or at the end. In this case, it's at the end.
Everyone in this family hates me.
Everyone in this family hates me. And it, on hates me, it's that exclamation, hey, everyone in this family hates me. And he kind of stands his ground on that last word. So to me, that's where I'm going to start the posing, and then I'll work back. And how do I get into that pose? Sometimes that's a nice way to start. I have how I end the shot, and then you can work backwards. And sometimes that's easier. Sometimes the beginning is the place where you're starting. So it depends what the performance of the audio is and what pose you're going to stay in longest. Let's go ahead and do that. And as you saw in the finished shot, it's a pose that's down like this. And I thought that was nice and simple, and even fitting to a character that's maybe, early teens. I'm not too concerned when I'm starting to pose. Yes, the pose is more here where the audio is, but I can do the pose anywhere and adjust the timing after. Not a big deal. But let's go ahead and just select everything, hit A, and then we're going to insert a key by hitting I. And so when I hit I, you can see that I hit I and it keys the location, rotation, and the scale. I don't need the scale information right now, so I'm going to undo. I'm going to go out of the pose mode into object mode and come over here and go object, animation, change key set, and all we need is location rotation. A selected, so now let's hit I and let's check it. So now it's just location and rotation. So know that that's an option, and you can decide when you hit I what it keys. So let's start posing. I'm gonna say that my character, he's coming forward a little bit. So that's what I'm thinking about, and that's what I'm gonna try to achieve here. And this control right here that moves pretty much your whole rig minus your feet, that's called the center of gravity, your COG, center of gravity. Because it influences the largest number of controls, to me it's the most important control. And just like with your workflow, you want to start broad. This is how we start broad, by using the COG. So that's an important control here. And to me, he came forward into that pose. So I'm just going to pull that COG forward, that COG control, and rotate him forward a little bit, just like that. And maybe even a little higher. Next, I'll just start working with the feet a little bit and just giving them a little bit of offset so they're not the same. They don't look the same. I think that's important. And already you can start to add appeal in your poses just by doing that. Nothing is the same on both sides. Just offsetting them a little bit. The weight's a little bit more on the left foot, so I'm just going to move that hip just a little. And what I'm doing is just adding, or just trying to think about the idea mainly. I'm adding a little bit of detail, but not much. I'm trying to keep it rough. That chest is up and he's forceful. Everyone in the family hates me. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Just by pulling him forward a little bit and rotating his chest up, he's mad. On this pose as well, I'm going to get the fingers in a fist and really just clench them, nice and simple. So this is the most important pose, simply because we're in this pose the longest. So I'm going to spend maybe 2-3 minutes just as I'm roughly blocking this idea out. So there's my fist pose. It doesn't even have to be of quality yet, because I know the next pass I will do that. Just going to key everything, make sure everything's updated. And those wrists are going to come back a little bit, just like this. Again, not too worried about the quality just yet. More the idea. Is it communicating? And currently we're getting there. So fist is like this. And the arms could be a little more straight, a little more forceful down. Shoulders at this point would come down. Nice. Yes, there's crashing. I'm not too worried about it. I'm not going to go crazy with the crashing. But again, that's all going to be fixed as we clean up the scene. And I think he's talking to someone older than him. And so that person, whoever he's talking to, is also taller than him. And he's looking up. And no one in this family likes me. Awesome. So here's our first pose, a very rough first pose. And let's do the other poses to see how we can get into this idea. And then how all those poses are communicating together. If we're happy, then we know we're on the right path. We have that pose already. I know I want to maybe hit it around frame 33. Just before the audio really spikes, I want to be in that pose. So I'm just going to already move it roughly where it needs to be. I'm going to go to the beginning actually now. And I'm not sure exactly what's in the middle of the poses. That's the benefit of pose to pose, is we want to go as extreme as possible and start to figure it out in just how the poses relate to each other. We have the performance because I can act it out. So I have an idea of what's in the middle, but I'm going to go back to the beginning now and work on that pose. That's the biggest extreme. I'm furthest away from the last pose. So that's what I'm going to do now. With everything selected, awesome. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is the first pose. And because of the way the audio is, I'm into the performance right away, and I'm not sticking in this first pose that long at all. So in that regard, it's not that important, but it is how we're starting the shot. So he's come forward, his left foot is forward. And so let's pull that COG back right now. I'm going to do Alt-R, Alt-G, and maybe even a little further back, something like this. And I'm going to force that character to come forward. I'm going to reset the hips. Perfect. And also reset the chest control. Awesome. On bigger pose changes, I do like to reset some of the control values back to default, as I feel it's easier for me to think about just the changing of the pose. So sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Same thing as before, I'm just going to give a little bit of an offset in the foot control. Just drag that foot back, perfect, this back. Make sure the weight of his body is under his feet. Good. Nice, and maybe he is a little more legs together, and then by the end he spreads out into a bit more of a power pose. Okay, so now let's think of the pose that he could strike at the beginning. At the end, his hands are straight, and he's going to be more vertical. Maybe at the beginning, everything's a little more relaxed, and then he builds that intensity. Okay, so let's reset some other controls here. I'm going to grab my shoulders, reset them, and I'm thinking that a nice just pose is with his one arm on his hip here. So I'm just going to bend his elbow and just force that pose into that idea. See what it looks like, and then you can make adjustments from there. Again, is the idea working? I'm not too worried about the detail or the quality yet, but is the idea working? Cool, so this hand is just going to be a little more relaxed by his side, and that's the whole idea there. And we're getting a little bit of contrast in the pose already. Awesome. So there's our pose. Now we've built two ideas, and you can hit your up and down arrows, and you can jump between those poses. And already just doing this, I feel the contrast. The amount of distance he's moving forward can be larger than it is currently. And so that's the benefit of pose to pose. Here's an idea. I like the pose, nice and simple. And then I'm looking at the last pose, and the appeal really isn't there currently. I'm not worried about that. But really what I'm seeing is the distance between it is not large enough. So that's valuable information. I'm going to take that and just adjust. Grab that feet, both feet controls, grab the COG, center of gravity. And coming over here now, I'm going to change from local to global. So they're all moving down the same axis, and I'm just going to pull them forward just like that. Insert a key, and up and down, and that's already better. He's physically coming forward more, and it feels better. So let's do some of the other poses needed to build the performance, and then we'll see what that looks like. And after that, if we're happy, we'll move on to the second pass and clean up those poses. Okay, so I like the first pose, I like the idea, and now let's just play the animation and hear the audio.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
And so he's building up, everyone in this family hates me, until he gets into that last straight pose. So I know this last pose is going to be elongated more, maybe a little closer to the camera. And then building up into that is this kind of shrug, and then he's going to come down powerful. That's what I'm building to. So then I can get to that last pose. And then the contrast of him being at the highest point and then down and back up, I think that's going to look good. Awesome. So we're here. Everyone. And you can see the audio starts right away. So right away, we're moving into some action. Everyone. So already everyone. So I'm going to just kind of pick frame 7. And he says everyone. And to me, the hands come up a little bit. Everyone, in this family, and then in this family, the hands go even higher, hates me. So that's the pose I'm going to do at frame 7. I'm already starting to think about timing. Awesome, so let's do that. You can see also I want to point out that I started with this last pose, or pardon me, the first pose, but it's the last pose in the performance. And then I went over here back to the beginning. And when I did, I reset some of the values. Now, as I go forward, I won't reset those values because the character moving through space is now more important to me. Okay, so let's go to frame 7. So everyone in this family hates me. Typically what I like to do is start with the feet here. Select that key, Control C, Control V. That just makes sure the feet are planted where it is originally. That's important. The COG, so everyone in this family hates me. Let's take a look at that. To me, he's going to come forward a little bit and maybe a little bit more over this foot. And that's simple. That's the pose. He's also going to start taking a step. Everyone in this family hates me. I'm going to select this, Control C, Control V, and maybe bring it back a little bit. And the foot can come up. The roll, everyone. He's just starting to take that step. He hasn't landed yet, but everyone in this family hates me. The hands to me are going to start to come forward. And he's just going to gesture forward a little bit. You can see here's a good example within the pose. You can decide, as the pose is happening, you can decide the amount of drag and the direction things are coming from and build it into the pose. So here, the hand is coming from the waist and it's going to come forward. I can decide if I want that wrist to be this way or this way. And by positioning the wrist down, I'm adding drag into it and then I can come up. So I'm building drag into the pose. Cool, so I'm just adding delay into the pose by simply posing it that way. This is a key pose. This is a key pose because I'm going to spend a little bit of time within my performance in this pose on screen. That's why it is a key pose. So I'm just crafting the idea a little bit. So everyone in this family hates me. We'll leave it like that. Perfect, select all, insert a key. Awesome. And so now here we have 3 poses. We're still in the blocking stage, but now we're going to do our first hold. And what a hold is, it allows time for the viewer to read your performance. So here we have 3 poses, and if I play it, it doesn't look very impressive.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this
Cool.
family hates me.
Looks pretty silly. But now we're going to start to, like I said, hold that pose, this pose, for a little bit of time. I'm going to select this key, Control C, and maybe go to frame 13, Control V. Now that's a hold. So we have one idea, frame 1. We have another idea, frame 7. From frame 7 to frame 13 is a hold. That idea is being held there, frozen, so you can see it. And then we're on to another idea. Those holds are very important. Okay? Everyone, and now we go into the next idea. So everyone in this family, and now we're building the pose more intense. We're curling up, getting him higher, just so it has a bigger contrast into that last pose. So everyone in, and again, you can kind of see it. He starts to speak over here. So that's roughly where I'm going to put my next pose. So frame 21 is a good place right now to hit that key, or to hit that pose. So with everything selected, A, I, to insert a key. Now let's start working on this pose. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select the foot, because when a character's starting to move, just thinking about what the foot is and where it is and how it's planted starts to tell you where the COG needs to be, that center of gravity. If that foot is planted here and I'm coming from over there, well, the weight of my body needs to be over one foot. As I'm going to a new pose, where are the feet? Then I know where the COG is, and then the rest of the body follows. So this foot was over here, and it's taking a step into this last pose. So that's how I know where I'm going. I'm going to select this key, Control C, and then just Control V. That's where the foot needs to be. I'm just going to reset the value of the hips just so it's not bothering me. And now the COG needs to be more over this foot. Bam, I just pull him forward and pull him more over his screen right leg, his left leg. Just pull him over, and I'm also going to rotate him over. So now the weight of his body is over that foot. Just like that, something like that. And maybe I start pulling him higher because I know this is the largest pose, and then I'm going to come down. Okay? And let's start working on the hands as well. This is a fun pose because you can, I think, add, in this particular performance, add some rage to his personality by building it in the pose. Get those arms up. He's had enough of whoever he's talking to not taking him seriously or disrespecting him. So I'm going to build that in the pose. And oftentimes, I would just build a story in my mind so that I can get closer or add what I think the feeling of the shot is. Add my own context, essentially. And that's all I'm trying to do is what looks better. Does it look better like this or up and down, and just seeing what the pose can be. Let's get that foot up. He's taking a step. And just like that, he's had enough. That foot comes up. Same thing with the foot. I can pose it up, but I know that when I come down, the foot's going to come down. So I'm going to add a little bit of delay, a little drag in that foot, and then it's going to really snap over maybe 2-3 frames. And I think that's going to look better. So I'm going to add a little bit of delay just by rotating that foot down. Just like that. And this camera's not fully set, but already, let's say it is, I'm going to already start to think, even at the blocking stage, a little bit about the silhouette. So instead of these lines intersecting there, I'm going to pull that foot a little bit more and just strengthen the pose even at this stage. Okay? I feel like that COG can be much more aggressive up and get him mad and angry and just bigger and taller. Forward. And now I'm hyperextending that leg, and you can see I'm just moving all over to different body parts that what I think is more important. So I'm going from one part of the body to another, just as I feel what's more important in this pose. Awesome. Let's add a little bit of anger into his fingers. Fingers come up. Yeah, I know this idea can be much more strengthened, but let's keep moving on. Cool. So there's our pose for now. A, select all, insert a key. Same thing as we did with this pose. There's a hold. I want to see that hold. That this pose is important. So Control C, Control V. Yeah. Okay. So here's the pose we have. We have one pose, two pose, which is a hold. So two pose, three pose, which is another hold, and then four poses. So let's just play what we have.
Hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this
Cool.
family.
So slowly we're getting to the idea. This pose I can already see is not very strong, so that needs to be cleaned up. But that's okay. And then I know when we come in from one extreme to another, the body typically overshoots. So overshoot is when you're going from one pose to another, and that physical movement, in order to stop on your mark, you overshoot. You go past your pose, and then you come back into that pose. That's called an overshoot. So he's coming down, and I'll show you how I build in that little overshoot pose. And sometimes not as important of an idea, but I do like to sometimes block that in. So here we go. With this blast pose, I'll just insert another key, and now I'll come back to this original one. And here's how easy an overshoot pose is. Bam. Awesome. So let's see what we have.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Cool. So the poses are relating to each other. And the blocking pass, I think, is looking good. Let's do some cleanup. Let's do some refining of some poses. And then we'll start to add the breakdown keys, the settles, and then I'll show you some advanced how we blend between them, or at least how I blend between those parts of the animations. Awesome. Let's refine the last pose together. Let's see what we can do to clean up the pose and make it a little stronger. So, one thing you can do, and this is the first thing I do, is I select all, insert a key, make sure everything's keyed, and then I go one frame over, either you Control C, Control V, and now you have a duplicate of that frame. And what we're going to do is work on improving the pose, and then we're going to flip back and forth. Did I improve the idea? Did I improve the clarity? If it's a yes, then I replace the original pose. If it's a no, that's okay, at least I tried. So that's the first thing I do when I now refine the pose. So I think for this one, what I'm looking at is maybe the shoulders can be less kind of boxy. Maybe even a little more stretched. Everything can be a little taller. That's what I'm looking at to do to upgrade the pose. So let's do that together. I'm going to start with the COG, the center of gravity. And I think it can still be a little bit cleaner, a little taller. Awesome. And then that shoulder to me stands out. Just going to rotate that down a little bit and into the body a bit more, trying to not draw attention to that part of the body for me. And maybe even don't be afraid to break the rig, essentially. You can elongate parts of the body as well. Don't be afraid to do stuff like that. I'm going to select I to insert, and then we can see if the pose is better. So now I can flip back and forth between the pose update just by hitting the left and right arrow keys. And the pose is stronger. It's wider a little, it's more aggressive, and he's up straighter. So not a big change, but enough that the pose now is more clear. The communication of that stance, I've had enough, is more clear. So it's a good pose change. So with everything selected, I'm gonna just insert a key one more time, and I'm gonna Control C and Control V. And that pose has now been updated. It's been refined, and it's now communicating better. It's stronger. Okay. One other thing I like to do is once I've done this maybe once or twice, refine the pose, and I'll do it for all poses, just the same method, compare, and then if it's better, replace. Another option that I like to do as well is with that key, the same key, I'll just space it out a little bit. I'm going to select both of them and hit V and go to auto. And what that does is it overshoots. So if we look at the graph here, the information's coming from this key right there. It's moving into this key, and as it's moving, it's overshooting and coming back into that pose. And I use the computer, the overshoot, to help in the pose. So you can see the pose now gets pushed and elongated. So I've crafted the idea, and now I'm allowing the computer to now further push that idea. And it does it in a nice way. So even something like this, he's taller, that's what I wanted. So he's coming from there. And I can pick something, even frame 42 is nice. So I like that. I'm going to, with everything selected, I to insert a key. And now, same thing as before, Control C, and I'm going to replace that pose. Control V. And now I've strengthened that pose one more time. And like I said, that's the step I'll do for all poses. And that's my cleanup pass. That's my second pass, where in my blocking, I've identified the poses, the key poses, the timing. I know it's all working. Second pass is now refining and making the performance that much stronger. So let's go ahead and play what we have.
Everyone in this family hates me.
Awesome.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Cool. So let's move on. Let's move on now to our third pass, where we add the breakdowns between the key poses, the breakdowns to define the arc and play with the timing a little bit, and then the settle. So the settle is this portion in here, that hold that we built in to allow the audience time to read that idea, that pose, that hold. Once we do the breakdown keys, we're going to take part of that hold and just make it a moving hold. We're going to settle into that idea. And that allows the performance to be less stiff. So the settles is one way that we remove stiffness from your performance. Let's go ahead and start right at the beginning with the breakdowns. One other thing, if you're looking at the keys and how I've spaced them, you can hopefully maybe pick up a pattern. When I set up my key poses, I like to build all my poses, my key poses, on odd frames. So you can see I'm on frame 1, then frame 7, frame 13 is the hold, that whole thing. Then the next idea, the next pose is frame 21, odd number, frame 29, frame 33, frame 37. And then the spacing between all those keys are even. So I build my poses on odd frames, and then the spacing, between those poses are even. And I've been doing this a long time, and so that's part of my workflow. So when I look at a graph editor, it's very easy for me to understand what I'm looking at because I always do the same thing. And I started this right at the beginning, maybe a year into my career. And before I was laying keys wherever, it didn't matter. I just, I'll lay it over here, no, over here. My spacing was never even, or I shouldn't say never even. It was all over the place. Sometimes it was even, sometimes it was not even. And so there was no structure to my workflow in terms of laying the keys. And then doing a little bit of research into the old traditional animators, you can see their timing. It's written at the top of their paper. And I noticed that their timing, for the most part, their key poses were on odd frames. And their spacing typically was even. And so they figured out a structure that worked for them, and I just copied them. And I think it works well. I think regardless of how you lay your keys, the spacing between the keys, I think, is valuable to have the spacing be even. Because now I can go between those two keys and know I'm in the middle. I think that's useful. So just be aware of the pattern there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the breakdown now within the pose-to-pose workflow. So the breakdown keys, again, the breakdown key defines the arc of the movement. And so the breakdown key for me on the COG is going to be in the middle. So I'm going to go into the middle of these two poses. And all I'm going to do is pull that COG down. Boop, not much, just like that. And then I'm going to favor the weight over his right leg, so that it frees up some of the weight for that one foot to move. As easy as that. Okay? And maybe I'm going to delay the rotation that way just a little bit. You can see how subtle this breakdown is. It's not a big breakdown. Cool? So you can see the COG is just going down a little bit, and we're building an arc between that pose. Cool? Awesome. Let's move on to the foot breakdown. For the foot, I keep it very simple. I'm going to select the foot controls and everything related to that foot, and then the heel. And all I'm going to do is copy this pose right there at the beginning. Control C, and I want that foot planted for a little longer. Control V. Now that foot's planted, and then it's going to move. And then in my cleanup pass, I'll add the detail of, well, how does the foot and the toes maybe add more drag there. That's more of a detailed thing, so I'm not going to build that in quite yet. Let's add a little bit of a breakdown on the hands. So same thing, I'm going to go right in the middle of those two poses, right in the middle, frame 4, and I'm going to delay some of the movement. Perfect. I'm going to delay the hand a little bit. And so the breakdown now, here in the hands, I'm just delaying parts of the motion. And when I'm doing that, and when I'm delaying the arm in this example, when I'm getting into the pose by delaying it back, I'm adding more movement to that part of the body. So when I do my settle, the overall movement of the whole body, there's going to be more movement in this part of the the body because I've now delayed the pose. And so it's going to travel more within that shorter amount of time. So there's going to be more speed there. And typically, wherever there's speed, your eye gets attracted to that part of the body. So I'm saying this hand's important by delaying the pose and then adding more speed, more movement. Your eyes are going to be attracted to that part of the body more. So that's how we can also then direct the viewer's eyes to where you want. So keep that in mind as well. Let's add a little bit of breakdown on the other arm, and it's going to be very subtle, much more subtle than the other one. So the wrist is going to be delayed, and then the fingers can be delayed a little bit as well. Just basically adding a little bit of drag as the hand moves forward, the fingers can delay. And I'll go one frame over, and by going closer to the end of the pose and then affecting, in this case, the head, again, I'm going to add more movement to the end of the action, drawing your eye to that part of the body. So that's the idea of when you do your breakdown keys, breakdown keys is somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have to be always in the middle, but the closer you get to the end of the action and affect the breakdown, affect the pose, the more movement you're going to add, the more your eye is going to be drawn to that part of the body. So usually it's the face you want to be drawn to, and sometimes the hands. So that's why we delay those a little more, or one of the reasons we do that. Cool. Let's grab the head and just down a little bit, not much, and maybe a little translate down. That's it. Cool. So let's select everything A, and you can see what's happening here. Let's zoom in here a little bit. It's a bit messy in the graph editor. It's a little hard to see, but we can see in the timeline. So we have pose and pose, what we built before. And then we have these three keys here. Those three keys are our breakdown keys on certain parts of the body. The breakdown keys define the arc between the movement. And we've also delayed parts of the body, so now we've added more speed to parts of the body. So those are the two things the breakdown keys do. Okay, so I'm happy with that. And it's a very quick move. So that's what kind of makes it a little more difficult here. As we build this breakdown together, I think it'll be a little more clear. But let's do the settle together. So A, select all, and I can see my keys here. And so now the settle is just a way to get into that pose, and then there's the hold, and that hold is very stiff. So the settle is going to make things softer while still retaining a lot of the feeling of that pose. So here's how that looks. Frame 7 to frame 13 is a hold. And I'm going to come in at, let's say, frame 5. Everything is selected. I'm going to insert a key. And then I'm going to come in over here and move this frame over maybe to frame 11 for now. I'm going to go V and automatic. Cool. And so if we zoom into the graph editor, you can see now it's just settling, easing into that pose. Okay, so let's play it. You can see how soft that is now. Okay, so we've already loosened up the animation. And we're still retaining the idea of that pose while moving into it. In TV animation, this is where you'd get to. Pose, pose, breakdown, settle. Pose, pose, breakdown, settle. Pose, pose, breakdown, settle. And you can do some pretty cool looking things. And even in some feature films, let's say the style of Lego, or even, the latest Spider-Man, where it is more pose-based, this is that style. And then what differentiates the styles is the pose, the aggression of the pose, and then the timing. Is it 4 frames between, or is it 12 frames between, and how sharp is that? And then your breakdowns really help influence the style as well. Okay, let's move on. Frame 13 to frame 21. It's a bigger pose change. So let's see how I handle that. Okay. So now the foot's landing. So that's where I start with. I'm going to select the foot, and I'm going to come in over here, Control C, and I know the foot has to land. And I want it to land actually quite soon, so I'm just going to do the very next frame, Control V. Oh, and so that's what's happening, is on this pose, the heel goes up. Not a big deal. I'm going to select the heel control and reset it. Perfect. Select everything, and now Control C, and I don't want the heel to go up right away, and Control V. I'm just dictating how long that heel stays on before it goes up. Cool. So that foot's now planted, and now I know the timing of the foot a little better. I then move on to the COG, the center of gravity. And so I'm just going to scrub the weight. I'm looking at this red portion of the body, the COG, that center of gravity. It's over here. And now I'm moving over. I've come up, I'm stepping. And now it really goes up. But before it does, the character steps down. So my breakdown is going to be somewhere around here. Maybe frame 16, maybe frame 17. I'll go 17 right in the middle. And I'm just going to pull that COG down so he takes the weight of the step. I'm going to push him a little more over that leg. And I'm going to rotate him into that pose a bit more. Cool. So there's my breakdown key for the COG. He goes down before he goes up. Cool. And I'm going to push that a little more. Perfect. And that's it. Next, let's take a look at this foot. That foot goes up right away. It doesn't need to. The easiest thing to do is just select those foot controls and just tell it to stay there longer. Control C, and maybe Control V on 15. Maybe even longer. Awesome. And then I can work on how that foot comes up. And let's go maybe 2 frames over, and already I'll build in now the breakdown for the foot. The breakdown for the foot, to me, all it is, well, I want the toes to come off the ground last. So all I've done there is rotate the toes, and then if you want to get a bit fancy in your posing, you can add a little bit of weight on the toes. If you wanted to get even more fancy, then you can spread the toes a little bit, like you're taking more weight there and the toes spread out. That's something you can do in your cleanup pass. But even this is the idea working. Let's see. So the foot's on the ground, and then it does come up nicely. There's one frame where it crashes. We just fixed that, but not a big deal. But the drag is looking good. And then as the toes come up, I'm going to select that toe, reset the value, and again, I want that toe dragging. And so all I do is make the body get into that pose. Cool. So let's take a look at the breakdown of the chest, the head, and the 2 arms for this action. So I'm going to come on over here to my chest control, and the middle is frame 17. Is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. To my chest, and the middle is frame 17. And all I'm going to do is maybe delay that chest a little bit. He was coming from over here, delay it this way a bit too. Awesome. Because he's then curling into this position. And you could even have a breakdown. You could have 2 breakdowns. Sometimes I do it on the head, and sometimes I do it on the arms. If I want the arc a certain way, I'll do a breakdown closer to the beginning of the pose change, and then towards the second pose, and now you're describing the arc of that part of the body more. The chest in this case doesn't need to, but if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to compress, that chest here, and I just wanted to for whatever reason, I could then add a breakdown here, and then there's more contrast. But just know that you can have multiple keyframe breakdowns. Cool. I'll keep it simple on the chest. Next, I'll go to the head. The end pose is the character kind of scrunched up a little bit and the head looking down. And so he's coming from over here. He's stepping down. The middle is frame 17. I'm going to go to frame 18. 1 frame over. I'm going to delay the head this way a little bit and back a little bit. So now his chin is delayed. And maybe I'll also pull that head up, just like that. And now what I'm doing is adding drag into that body, that part of the body, and then he's gonna go into that last pose. And so by doing the drag and pushing the breakdown key one frame closer to that last pose, I'm adding more movement on that part of the head, and so your eyes draw into that part of the body. Cool. And let's do breakdowns on the hands, and then this breakdown for this gesture is done. And so let's just scrub. I like scrubbing. I start from the pose, and then I'm getting into this idea. And what I'll do is just delay the shoulders. Not much. There we go. Cool. I'll really start to add more drag as I get further out in the limbs. Cool. And now let's really bend that wrist. So here we're kind of up, and now we're turned over in this next pose. So over here, I might even go one frame over, because to me that's important. Adding more movement on the wrist. I'm going to just drag it down. Build in the drag into my breakdown key. Just like that. And then it's going to come up, and you can see the wrist then kind of gets back into that pose. And I like the way that looks, so I'm just going to push it even more. Really drag that wrist, so then it has somewhere to come up into. Cool. So let's go ahead and play what we have so far, and then we'll do the settle.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family.
Awesome. I think it's looking really good. I'm going to push the COG a little more for the breakdown key, and all that is down. And that's basically it. Okay, let's select everything. And now we can see the breakdown keys are these ones right here, these highlighted ones. And normally I wouldn't have a breakdown key so close, one frame from the original pose. But what these two frames are is the foot control just landing. So that's included in the breakdown keys. But really what it is pose, frame 13, and frame 21. Everything in here is the breakdown keys. Let's go ahead and do the settle like we did at the beginning. And so we're getting into this pose, and you could have the settle be 1 frame, 2 frames, 5 frames. You decide how soft that settle is going to be. And the softer it is, the more away from that original last pose you get. So if you want it soft, you go 4 frames. Typically, I only go 1 or 2 frames. But let's go frame 19 in this case. Let's give that a try. I have everything selected. I'm going to insert a key, and then let's move this key over G, and maybe we go to frame either 25 or 27. Perfect. Let's go V and auto clamped.
Family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
There you go.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
So that's feeling pretty good, and this is the settle. Frame 19 to frame 27. You can see how soft that is. And that's how you can loosen up your performance.
Family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Awesome. Let's do the breakdown on this key. I think this is a very interesting breakdown. So let's do that together as well. It's only 4 frames, the distance. Before it was 8 frames between the two poses. There was 8 frames between those. Now there's only 4. So the timing is much more aggressive. And then the contrast between the two poses also are pretty aggressive. And we're going to do some fun stuff, I think, in the breakdown. So let's take a look. Let's start from frame 29, the original pose. And we come down. Perfect. So let's start with that COG. Perfect. In this case, I'm going to even push my performance more in my breakdown to even go higher. And then it's more aggressive coming down. So this is one of the fun parts here. Instead of maybe making the breakdown whatever it's going to be, I'm going to delay it up high. And I'm just going to go 1 frame. Really favor this first pose. I'm just going to pull that, be aggressive about it, Make it fun. Perfect. So you can see he goes up and then he's going to come back down. Cool. Let's now add the breakdown key for this foot. So I'm going to really delay that foot. And now really turn it over. Cool. And this knee can come in a little bit. Awesome. Nice. And you can see even from this pose, I could have, and I will, when I do my detail, I will add the delay more like this. So then the contrast is even snappier. But for now, that's what the pose is. Cool. Let's delay the toes even more. Select these, deselect everything. Perfect, perfect. Awesome. So the toes are really now delayed in that direction. Cool. Let's go to the head. Actually, let's go to the COG, or pardon me, the chest. The chest is going to start to go up. I'm adding drag to that part of the body. Perfect. Boom, he's opening up. Maybe it's a little much, but that's okay. We can always tone it down. Let's go to the head. The head, I'm going to come one frame from the end. Pull that up. Delay that head. Tilt that, just like that, something like that. Again, if we don't like it, we can undo, delete it. And you can see even just there, the drag we're building in the head. I think that's going to look good. So, while I'm building the poses, it's like, yes, the contrast is good. And even with experience, you know, okay, in this part of the, from the pose to pose, in this part of the breakdown, I have an idea what the arc's going to look like. And I know I'm going to exaggerate past the point of that pose that I built. So this is one example of that. And this is how we can add extra power to your performance. Let's work on the hands quickly together because it's a cool breakdown. This is a breakdown that does require multiple keys here. So let's just go 2 frames over, and I want that pose in the hands to come close to the body, come up, and then basically straight down instead of arcing off to the side. So let's do that. I'm still going to bend the elbow. Awesome. I want the shoulder really to go up. I mean, it's up there. So you can see I'm crashing into the head from this angle, and because of the speed of the shot, you just don't notice it. But it does sell more the intensity. So that's what I'm after. Cool. And what I want is those hands to really, to be turned over and high. Cool, I think that's looking good. And we'll see what the wrists look like after. But those hands are coming up high and he's mad. And now I'm going to do the breakdown over 1 frame between these 2 keys. And you can see how the hands open up and then come down. All I'm going to do is get the hands close to the chest. And you can see the height of the hands aren't the same. Bam, and he comes down. Awesome, so that's the breakdown. Awesome. There's no settle in this one because, well, we're going into this pose And this pose is the overshoot. We're pushing past the original pose and then we're coming up into our last final pose. Awesome. So let's work on this a little bit. And so here's what I'm going to do as well. I'm going to select this last pose and go V and just make a vector, just so it hits harder. It really just snaps into there. Bam. And I can see the feet, this foot here, the screen left foot is slipping. So I don't want any slipping. So I'm just going to select the foot, Control C, go to that pose, Control V. Perfect. So once it's on the ground, it's on the ground. There's no sliding. Awesome. So I'm going to hit A, select all. This is now V for vector. So it's sharp. And then we're coming up into this pose. And I'll just do auto clamp, make sure it is. And I'll do a breakdown here as well. So we're going to hit sharp, hit hard. And then it comes, we're going to hit hard. We're going to hit hard and sharp into that overshoot pose. And then we're coming up. But even between those, I can add a little bit of an arc. So let's do the breakdown here as well. And I'm going to start with the COG. And all I'm going to do is just delay that pose down. Oops. And that's it. That's subtle. So we've hit into this pose, and we're just staying there longer before we come up. Cool. I'm going to go to the middle now, one frame over. And I'm going to delay the chest just by pushing that down, and I'm compressing that part of the body. Not much. There we go. And then he comes up, and he comes up straighter. And I think that could be pushed. Awesome. Let's go to the head. One frame over. Down. Rotate. And again, because this breakdown is so close to that last frame, that last keyframe, there's going to be the most movement on the whole body is going to be on the head. Bam. And your eyes cannot help but look at that part of the body. Bam. It's the most movement. You can see the spacing over one frame. If you look right here at the nose, one frame, and I go over. Let's go over one frame. Right there. So it's a big jump. There's no other place on the body that has that much movement over one frame. So that's what I mean when you favor your breakdown to one side or another, you're also dictating the amount of movement on that part of the body. I'll do a little bit of a breakdown on the hands. So we snap down. I think right here, we can push the shoulders down. I'll select both. Global. And I'm just going to push those shoulders down. Bam. And you can see the delay or the overshoot in the shoulders now too. So that feels good. Let's play what we have. Woo! You can see how aggressive this part of the body is. And it's going to loosen up a little as we just add some settle. So let's do that. Select everything because I still want to keep some of the power. You can see how much I pulled and pushed in such a short amount of time that last part really is snappy. So maybe I went too far, but I'm going to play with this, with the settle, and I think it'll just come out right. So let's give it a try. Here's what we have so far. We've done all our poses, we've added the breakdowns and the settles. And if you get to this part, I think that's really good. So good on you if you followed along and posed out your character, added the breakdowns, understanding that when you do a breakdown, you're defining the arc and affecting still the timing. And then you've added your settle. And so now the next thing I'm going to show you is how we further blend between some of these. And so let me show you that. So I have everything selected. And let's start at the beginning. We're going from the original pose, breakdown into the settle here. And then we have a little hold. And then on to the next idea. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go one frame over, insert a key, and what I'm doing is just one frame over from that hold. And then I'm going to maybe, right at frame maybe 6, 7, somewhere in there, insert a key as well. And I'm just going to deselect the foot because I want to keep that timing, and everything else is still selected. And I'm going to select those two keyframes, those holds, X, delete.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family
Cool.
hates me.
So now there is no hold at all. The body is always moving. Cool? Let's go on and do the same thing over here. So we're going from this breakdown, this idea, this pose, breakdown, settle. All this is a settle. And this is a little hold here, a little hold. And now we're going into the next big idea. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select A again, select everything. I'm going to go one frame over, insert a key, perfect. Maybe even right as we're leaving frame 20. Let's give that a try.
Family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Awesome.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
So you can see how it's starting to blend between those ideas. And when you're doing what I've just done, where we have the pose, breakdown, settle, pose, breakdown, settle, and now I've inserted keys on either side of those poses and then deleted those key poses and the hold, and now I'm blending now effectively between these things. It's hard now to go back. So before you do this, you want to save, you want to get the approval, or just go to bed, wake up, get fresh eyes. Yes, I like what I'm doing. I'm going to continue now. Because once you're past this point, making fixes to the shot, it becomes difficult. Because you started to lose your foundation. So just know that with the pose-to-pose workflow, after a certain point, it becomes hard to fix. So that's why the blocking is so important and the cleanup is so important. And even up to the point where the pose-to-pose, the breakdown and the settle, all that is still good because you can affect things still pretty well there. If I don't like something, I can delete all the breakdown keys and just move my timing back, and I still have everything there. But once you start deleting the original key pose, then it becomes hard to fix if there's any notes that come in. So just be aware of that. Let's give the face a little bit of a performance. So let's come on over here, N, and let's just pick a little bit of an angry face shape. You can just double click and already that looks good. So let's see what that looks like. Cool. Don't mind the eyes. We would be able to fix that. Awesome. I think it's looking really good. And the fact that this part is that aggressive, I think is actually a good thing. Because once you add the facial performance and then the overshoot of the mushroom, you can soften that a little bit with overshoot and secondary action. So, yeah, and then the facial performance is going to read well. But this is the pose-to-pose workflow. And then this is the final result if this kind of animation is desired. Like I said, I think getting pose-to-pose breakdown settle is a fantastic place to get to. And then even within that, how you do your poses, the different sizes of the poses, the spacing and the timing between them, it's endless. So that's really where the magic of pose-to-pose lies, is in the power to build those ideas and compare them to each other and make adjustments until you're happy with your performance. I'm not going to do any facial performance in this tutorial. I'll do another tutorial specifically on facial performance. But I'll just give you an idea how I would approach it. At this point, I would then after start with the eyes, and I would do pose-to-pose on just the eye performance. At this point in time, I like the expression to be so and so. I'm going to key the eyes. And then over here, I want the expression to be this. I would key it. And then again, you can do a breakdown. You might add a blink, but pose-to-pose on the eyes for myself. That's how I approach it. And then on the mouth, I do a layered approach. I start with the jaw, do a pass of the dialogue. If I'm happy with the way the dialogue is reading, the mouth is reading the jaw, then I'll do the corners, and then I'll do some shapes. But it's all based off the timing of that jaw. So that's the approach I would do on the face. I'm going to show you the final result now.
Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me. Everyone in this family hates me.
Here's the final result. I hope you enjoyed the process of the pose-to-pose workflow. If you did, please like the video so that I know this content is useful. Stay tuned for the straight ahead and layered workflow videos. When ready, I'll provide links to the videos. If you want more animation material, sign up to my newsletter through my website. Alright everyone, take care. Bye bye.